Welcome. My name is Jeanelle Horcasitas. I have the honor of being your moderator today. I know there's a bit of a room switch, so today's panel is called In the Beginning There Was World Building. So I hope that's expected, that you know that's what you're here for, hopefully. This was brought to you by Mysterious Galaxy Bookstore, so I hope you get to check them out later. And to my right over here is our wonderful authors and special guests today who have transported us in their novels through their incredible world building and narratives, and so I'm really excited to get this conversation started. All right, so we only get an hour, have some questions lined up, but I'm going to start out with some brief introductions, so bear with me. I will try to go through them quickly because I'm sure you all know who many of them are, but let's start with TJ.
Hey.
All right, TJ Klune is the New York Times and US Today best-selling Lambda Literary Award-winning author of The House in the Cerulean Sea, Under the Whispering Door, In the Lives of Puppets, and the Greek Creek series for adults, the Extraordinaires series for teens, and more. Being queer himself, Klune believes it's important now more than ever to have accurate, positive, queer representation in stories. Welcome, TJ.
Thank you.
Next, we have Wesley Chu. Wesley Chu is the #1 New York Times best-selling author of 13 novels, including the first 2 books in the war arts saga, The Art of Prophecy and The Art of Destiny, and the Eldest Curses trilogy with Cassandra Clare. He is the recipient of the Astounding Award for the Best New Writer and the Alex Award for his debut novel, The Lives of Tao. Wesley is also an accomplished martial artist, and he lives in Los Angeles. Welcome, Wesley. Next, we have L.R. Lamb. L.R. was first Californian and now Scottish. Lamb is the Sunday Times best-selling and award-winning author of Dragonfall, the Dragon Scales trilogy, the Seven Devils duology, co-written with Elizabeth May, Goldilocks, the Pacifica novels, and the award-winning Micah Gray trilogy, which begins with pantomime. Welcome, L.R. Thank you. Next, we have Holly Black. Holly Black is the #1 New York Times best-selling and award-winning author of speculative and fantasy novels, short stories, and comics. She has sold over 26 million books worldwide, and her work has been translated into over 30 languages and adapted for film. She currently lives in New England with her husband and son in a house with a secret library. Book of Night is her adult fiction debut. Welcome, Holly. Next, we have Victoria Aveyard, who is an author and screenwriter. Born and raised in a small town in western Massachusetts, she has a BFA in writing for film and television from the University of Southern California's School of Cinematic Arts. She is the author of New York Times #1 bestseller and US Today bestselling series Red Queen, and the #1 New York Times bestseller Realm Breaker. Recently released the next installment, Blade Breaker. Welcome, Victoria. Welcome, everybody. All right, so we will start with our first question. I'd like to ask you all about your creative and just writing process in general when it comes to world building. You have such intricate, complex worlds that you create, and just curious what sources you draw inspiration from. Do you do any type of research? What are you hoping readers will get with these worlds that you're creating? So we can start off with Victoria at the end over here, and then we'll just move through if that's all right. But feel free to jump in if you all have things to say.
Great.
Want it to be free-flowing.
Yes, let's do that. I think anyone who has come within 3 feet of me knows that I'm going to say I always start with a map when it comes to world building. I am one of those kids who, when I was growing up, I would go into the library and at school and I would read the atlases because I was very well adjusted. So I really start with the geography of the world that I want to tell the story in. I know basically what the concept is and what the general flavor I'm going for, and maybe some tonal references, but I have to know what world I am telling the story in, because when you think about reality, and the point of all of this world building is to make you believe in the story, to make you feel like it is real. In reality, geography informs so many pieces of our culture and our history, the way that language spreads, the way that politics works. You know, you draw a mountain range and it's going to tell you something about the two places on either side of it. So I always have to start with the map as my foundation. I did learn that plate tectonics is too far back. I don't need to learn the plate tectonics of my fantasy world.
Until you do. I always start with two things. I start with how the magic works, and a lot of times that is a process. And I need to know kind of the texture of the world, like the way it's supposed to feel. And, you know, all books are essentially torture devices for the main character, right? If they have a secret, it's coming out. If they have a fear, they'll be facing it. Anything that they never wanted to have happen, it'll be happening. And to that end, I think the world that you are putting them in has to have something to do with that. It has to be part and parcel of bringing out of them the stuff you want to bring out of them. And so I think a lot of times for me, building the world and building the magic is part of figuring out like the feel of the book and also the theme or the thing I want to say or the thing I want to mess with or the terrible thing I want to do to them, and moving them around together.
I love world building. It is my favorite form of procrastination when I should actually be writing the novel itself. And I get really nerdy and really into it. So I've developed a world building worksheet that I kind of fill in as I go along. I know it's awesome. At the moment for Dragonfall, it's 100 pages long. It's ridiculous. But I tend to kind of start with character and then work my way out, I think. So once I know who my main character or characters are, I figure out, okay, well, how have they been shaped by the world? How has the world wounded them? What kind of themes and how can they all kind of, be kind of synergistic together and demonstrate each other. I'm also really fascinated in language in particular in world building, so I spend a lot of time on that. Food, very important. Kind of mannerisms and body language can be really cool. And then I love going down research rabbit holes. So my favorite research rabbit hole I did for Dragonfall was lizard reproduction, AKA lizard sex, because it's wild. Go down that Wikipedia rabbit hole. Have fun, man. It is insane.
Before we start, a real quick show of hands. How many people here are writers? All right,
Oh,
excellent.
yeah.
It's always good to know. So I'm a little bit different I'm almost a little bit opposite of what Victoria does. I'm what I consider a just-in-time world builder. So I started, it's almost like playing a video game where, character opens her eyes, the viewer is looking at the screen, and you're like, well, this is the world. Let us start exploring. But for me, I'm a high concept kind of guy, so I have an idea, what if a prophecy is broken? What if aliens inhabit people's bodies? What if time travel is real? And then from that high concept, I create my characters that I think should be following this, this plot. But with world building, I view world building in your environment as a character. In many times, what people will consider world building like a theater, like a play. A static screen for actors to do their thing. But in reality, Laura's absolutely right. Is when your environment informs your character. Characters are very complex, so there are many variables among that environment that affects who this person is. What they smell, how tall they are, can they fly? I mean, if we're going to break physics, and we're consistent with that in the world building aspect, then the readers will buy into it. So I start with the characters, and I start with where I feel like I want the story to go, and then I start crafting the environment around them that kind of informs their existence. And then once I have that, I kind of just cut them loose and let them do whatever they want. And then as they explore the world, I explore the world too.
Y'all are so fancy. My last book exists because I bought a vacuum cleaner. Okay. So like in the Lives of Puppets, I wrote that book because I bought a Roomba vacuum cleaner. And the Roomba vacuum cleaner, when you start them, they have to map out your house, right? So I turned this stupid little machine on. His name is Hank, by the way, don't ask. And I turn it on, and he starts going around my house, and almost immediately gets himself stuck in a corner and makes the saddest beeping sound I've ever heard a machine make. I'm not kidding you. It was like, beep. And I was like, what is this tiny little machine? What is going on? And then, of course, all of a sudden, I had this idea in my head of this Roomba vacuum whose name was Rambo, who had social anxiety, but he also had a heart of gold. And he lived with a human. But if there's a human, there needs to be a nursing machine because she needs to make sure that he's okay. But what if she was a sociopath? And that's how it works for me. I build my world around the characters. I try to give them some kind of personality, at least a precursor personality that I can explore and go with, and then it kind of explodes from there. So I build from the ground up. Sometimes it has to start with a vacuum cleaner. I'm so sorry, that's so embarrassing. Y'all are like, look, these are big famous authors, and he's on the New York Times bestseller list, and here he is talking about vacuum cleaners. It's totally cool.
You know, my debut novel, The Lives of Tao, the alien in The Lives of Tao is my alarm clock.
Yeah.
It's my 6 a.m. alarm clock.
Yeah,
Wake
because
your ass up. You know?
humans have this thing where we tend to anthropomorphize or humanize all the little things in our lives. So, of course, when I got this stupid little vacuum cleaner, I had to put googly eyes on it because that's what you do. That's what you do. And it gave him personality. And it's just this weird little human quirk that I love, that we humanize things that are inhuman just because that's how our brains work. So, yep, that's why I write, because my voices in my head won't shut up and they make me write stories about vacuum cleaners. So.
I love it. I also have named my Roomba, and when it's going around, I say it's getting swifty. So
Yeah.
I totally get it. Maybe I can write a book now.
Only cool people name their vacuum cleaners. So.
Mine's Wally, actually.
There you go. Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. So here's kind of a flip question. I could tell that some of you have like a process with a worksheet, such as LR, or you're really drawing from inspiration, or you kind of explore along the way. And I'm curious, during that process, what are some of the challenges that you've come across while have you ever built this world and you're like, you know what, it's not working, I need to scrap it, or even with the mapping with Victoria, like, what is that, has it happened before, and how do you kind of overcome those challenges? Do you just rework it in the world? Do you have to start over? How does that work out for all of you? We'll start with TJ this time.
I wrote a book about machines, and I don't know anything about machines. So I was like, all right, I'm going to go into hard sci-fi kind of. And then the more I started researching it, the more I realized this is boring. I don't want to talk about wires and all these little things that go into machines. So I went In the Lives of Puppets, I went through a science fiction way through a fantasy lens. I wanted to be able to have the little bit of magic still left in there. But when it starts with something like a character like Rambo, who is going to be part of this book, growing from there, I knew that we had to build out all of the other characters that were going to be in this tiny little family. So I do this thing, it sounds kind of like what Wesley does, is I write outlines that are egregious. They are ridiculous. My outline for In the Lives of Puppets was 60,000 words itself, and it's just filled with stuff that half of it won't even get into the book. It's just for me. I know the main character's birthday. I know his fears. I know what he dreams about. I know his favorite food. It's stuff that'll never be in the book, but it's stuff for me to be able to let me stay with these characters for as long as possible. These outlines that I've created are starting to get a little unwieldy, so I need to back off a little bit with how much time, because I love outlines, man. I love spending time in the outlines going, oh, this is going to be so good when I get to this. This is wonderful. This is great.
I, too, would like to outline. My outlining process is a little bit different. I used to world build, but also I do the whole just-in-time discovery world building. And the problem is I actually have relatively short outlines that grow. I'm a big believer in giving my characters free will, so like, I'll have an outline, for the first first act of the book, which is like 60,000 pages. And at one point, the character's supposed to make a right turn, he wants to make a left turn, and he really wants to make that left turn. I don't want him to go that way. And I used to try to write around it and world build, plot around it so they do make that turn I want them to make, but then I realized that that's not really organic and it doesn't feel real. So I give them free will, and then I re-outline. And then what happens is
A
like,
benevolent God.
by the time I finish the book, who's outlining who, I guess? But by the time I finish the book, I'm like on outline version like 9.14 or something like that. So that's why mine grow pretty big.
So what about you, LR?
I don't think I've like rejigged worlds per se, but I've done a lot of refining basically. So it starts out very broad stroke, and then as you're writing, that's when you discover all the cool little details. And sometimes you go a bit over detailed, and then you got to pare it back in the next draft. But again, I like hands-on experience as much as possible as well. So one of my upcoming books is a near future thriller similar to Goldilocks, but set on the moon. So yesterday I went on a tour around Jet Propulsion Lab, and I asked them all these questions about what would happen if a solar flare hit Earth. The answer is it's not great. But it was really helpful because I'd done loads and loads of research, but when it came to actually figuring out what my characters would be doing with all that research, because I am not a renowned expert in science and don't have much of a science background, I just got completely stuck. But I find if you go to experts and very nicely ask them questions, they're really excited to geek out about their area of expertise. So yeah, a polite email goes a long way, I found, and that can really help your world building, because yesterday in about 15 minutes, I spoke to a solar physicist and a radio expert, and they completely fixed my plot, and I'm very grateful.
So I write sort of two different kinds of magic systems. One that is very folklore-based, and because I'm mostly writing about fairies, but I'm writing about different kinds of folklore too. It's a lot of research, right? It's a lot of reading stories and sort of synthesizing that stuff and making decisions. But then there's the other kind of world building, like with Book of Night, where I actually had to create a magic system that did not exist before. And in that case, yes, I made many wrong turns. And probably the biggest thing I learned specifically from making that magic system is that you can come up with a lot of cool ideas, but that they need to be two things, and this is what made me burn my original system down to the ground. They need to be story generative, by which I mean they need to suggest a lot of stories that are different from the story that you are telling to feel real. And the second part is they have to be thematically resonant. They have to actually let you get at the stuff you want to get at. And I had so many really cool ideas that didn't do either of those things. And that is probably the biggest thing I learned from all of the things I threw out.
Probably my biggest challenge with world building is when to stop. I definitely, I don't want to burn all my momentum and all of my sort of excitement for the story on the world building. So I have those moments where I'm reining myself in because I'm like, no one needs to know about this trade route, Victoria. And a good rule of thumb, because I write second world fantasy, if you also write second world fantasy, a good rule of thumb is if you know where salt comes from in your world and where it goes, if you're in a main city, where are they getting their salt from? You're good to go. You can start. I had a professor once who said that good world building is when you're in the middle of a scene, in the middle of a story, and you feel like you can turn around from the action and open a door and something else is happening in the next room. And that's what I'm always trying to service with my world building, is using it as a tool to make you believe in the story I'm telling you. Because if you don't believe, that is the foundation, and you won't, care about anything that comes after it. So a little bit towards what TJ was saying, we have to walk this line of balance of what we know and what is interesting to us about the world and what you need to know. Because as soon as we give you a little too much information and it's a little overwhelming, we start to break that sense of disbelief and kind of push you out of the story. So we're always trying to give these tiny little details and give you the smallest amount in ways that flesh out the world for you, for yourself. I love having curse words. Curse words are very indicative of world building. And if you figure out what people swear on, you, the reader, are then going to infer so many other things that I don't have to put on the page. And it helps kind of immerse you in the story. And that's what I'm always trying to do, is Achilles dip you in the river Styx kind of thing.
Amazing. Thank you all so much. All right, let's dive maybe a little bit into the worlds themselves and some of the characters that you all have in your novels. Can you all speak to what type of issues that they're grappling with, or what is it that you're trying to bring to the forefront? Is some sort of underrepresented voice or community, or critique on the political system today, something like that that is being drawn out in a very interesting way through this world or through these characters that are impacted by maybe this dystopian world or whatever it might be that you've created. We'll start with Victoria this time.
So for the Realmbreaker series specifically, I was in a position where I'd had a book series come out that was really, really loved and really supported, and my publisher was kind of like, where is the wind blowing you? Where do you want to go next? And I thought about, when I was 14 years old, what did I love and what was I wanting to read? And when I was 14 years old, and I still am, I was completely obsessed with The Lord of the Rings. But it was a story that never felt like it had a place for me, a girl, or anyone who isn't a straight white guy. So it was very like, you can love this thing and you can support it, but you can't be part of it. And I wrote a lot of fan fiction, not just for Lord of the Rings, but the through line was always like bringing more women into these stories that were very male dominated. And then suddenly I was in a position as a published author where I could kind of think, oh my God, maybe I am able to pursue that now. So Realmbreaker is very much my dialogue with the sort of classic fantasy quest, but also including people who haven't really been able to be heroes, at least what I was seeing when I was a teenager. So it very much feels like, a save the world kind of group that I could be part of. And like, yeah, I can't run for 3 days, but maybe I'll get there.
For me, Book of Night came out of a couple things, but the weirdest one was, so around 2016, I decided to get my ears surgically pointed. This is true. I know you're like, no, they're actually, see? Kind of. They'd be better if they were bigger. It's the first time I really wished I had much, much bigger ears. Because the bigger they are, the more good the point is. Because they can only work with what they got. Anyway, I went to this guy. He's a professional ear pointer, travels the world pointing ears. His name is Sampa von Cyborg. And, I guess I was feeling a little, like, insecure about it because, I was a little bit older than what I thought his average customer was. And I had driven down and I had said that to him. And he was like, oh, no, the guy, in front of you was 50 and living as a vampire. And I said, oh, yeah, well, oh, no, I'm sorry. I've told this wrong, but he said the guy in front of you was living as a vampire. And I said, oh, yeah, it's a young man's game. And he said, well, he's 50, but he looked a lot younger. So I originally, when I started thinking about this book, I was thinking about somebody who was sort of went around the world altering people's shadows. And so it came out of that. It came out of also walking with my son and seeing how his shadow got bigger and smaller and how fascinating that is and how it's kind of like a magic that is just intrinsic to all of us. And, for me, I love writing about ladies who make big mistakes. It's my thing. And I've been reading it, and it's different, though, when you're writing about, because this is my first adult book, and when you're writing about an adult who isn't making their first huge mistake, they're making what might even be their last. We only get so many chances sometimes. And so I was really interested in that, and that is, those things came together to sort of make the book.
So I started with a question for mine, which was, kind of a two-parter. One, what if dragons were gods? And two, what if your gods just really hated you? So I was thinking about kind of how history is a story and how a lot of it depends on who's telling it and who's writing it down, and what gets forgotten across long expanses of time. So the kind of background of this is that humans and dragons used to be symbiotic, the classic kind of dragon rider fighting some mysterious ancient evil. But humans got jealous that dragons had more magic, so they stole their magic and banished them to a dying world, which understandably the dragons weren't too happy about. But humans have short lives, much shorter than dragons, so in the intervening centuries, they forgot what they did, and they now worship their dragons as gods. And then the kind of way this story kicks off is I've got two characters who both really want new lives and things to change. So one, the dragon, he was raised to be a chosen one, but so far he's failing at it. He's trying to, scry these visions and nothing's happening. So he steals a prophecy and falls into the human world. So it does what it says on the tin. First chapter, dragon fall down, dragon goes splat. And then he ends up accidentally bonding to a thief, Arcady, who is desperate to kind of steal the future that was taken from them. and they didn't choose this bond. They don't necessarily like this bond. If it's kind of half-formed, so the only way to finish it is through trust. So it gave me a chance to have basically queer enemies to lovers and a hot dragon. And that was fun.
So, I grew up in Nebraska. Okay. And like, so we immigrated to Nebraska back in the 80s. And like, if anybody grew up in Nebraska back in the 80s, you know, there was like 5 Asian people in the state, and like 4 were in my family. So, so at the time, it was quite a culture shock. And back in Nebraska in the 80s, you know, especially if you're an immigrant, you're like, let's just integrate successfully. Let's not, you know, let's just learn to be American. So I didn't really have like a connection to my old country, you know, until like one day I discovered something called Samurai Sunday, which is a bunch of really badly dubbed kung fu movies. And that's kind of how I learned about my people. We punch through walls and fly, and we wear a lot of dresses. And but then like it kind of informed who I was as a child. Like, I wanted to be that kind of people. So I started training martial arts at an early age, and so I've always wanted to write like a wuxia book, a kung fu book. But that really wasn't a market for that back in the day, or actually not until recently, to be honest. So that was my bucket list item. I wanted to write a kung fu book. And like, I remember this idea's been sitting in my head for a long time. And starting around 2015, it kind of came together. You know, I read a lot of fantasy as a kid, and I'm like, why are there always prophecies? You know, what if they're just a bunch of BS? And so that was my central conceit for the art of prophecy, is what if a prophecy is broken early on? How does that affect the entire world around it, you know, all the people who are involved, the people who live there? And then I wanted to merge that with my conceit, which is, you know, I want to write a kung fu book. So around around 2016, 2017.
I remember you WhatsApped me. You were like,
Yeah.
I want to write this kung fu fantasy book. What do you
Yeah.
think? And I was like,
I talked to a bunch of my writer friends, and they're all writing like what I thought were like big important books, like books about culture, books about, you know, race, gender, class, and they're like, Wes, what are you working on? And I'm like, I want to write a kung fu book, you know. But you know what? The heart wants what the heart wants, and so that's kind of how I ended up here. I'm not sure what the question was anymore, but.
I don't know either, because y'all have been talking about kung fu and vampires and all this stuff, so now I'm just going to talk about gay stuff. All right. How many of you have, I'm sure many of you, how many of you have read and or heard of found family? Found family trope, everything like that. Okay. Do you know where it actually comes from? Queer people. Hi. Found family is a trope that exists in fiction that has enjoyed a lot of popularity as of late. But for a lot of people who read that, they don't know the basis of it or why it exists. Found family, the trope, exists because of queer people. Many of us, did not get to have the acceptance, the love, and the hope, the joy that parents should provide children they bring into this world. So what do? We have to go out and we have to make our own families. My family consists of my sister, my brother, and everybody else is not related to us by blood. The reason being is because I had a shit time of it growing up. I had a terrible time. I was born in the 80s, came of age in the 90s in rural Oregon, in a very small little town where my graduating class had about 50 people in it. I was the queer kid with undiagnosed ADHD. Can you imagine how well that would go on in the 90s? Especially when we were still in the middle of the AIDS crisis. An entire generation of queer men above me had been killed because the president, Reagan, at the time, did not want to do anything about the AIDS crisis. So when I look out and when I think about what I do and why I do what I do, it's because of the fact that I remember what it felt like being a 12, 13-year-old queer kid with ADHD in rural Oregon, never getting to see himself in anything. Not in books, not in movies, not in television, not in video games, anything. And I told myself, because I wanted to be a writer since I was 6, 7 years old, I told myself that if one day I would become a writer, if one day people would read my books, they would be about people like me. Because the stories, especially in science fiction and fantasy, were never about people like me. If we were in books, we were offensive caricatures, we were over-the-top stereotypes. We were there to teach the straight people a very valuable lesson by either getting sick or hurt or killed. So when I write what I do, I write for anybody who wants to read my books. But I'm thinking of my queer audience in mind because I know how it feels to be able to find a book and say, this is me. This is me in a book. This character is just like me. It is magic to be able to see yourself in a book. And for so long, so many marginalized communities never got the chance to see themselves in books. And now, in the year 2023, when so many people are getting the chance to see themselves in books, you have old white guys trying to take that right away. You have old white guys going into libraries, going into bookstores. You have books, you have libraries in communities that are being defunded because they refuse to take down pride displays. That is what is at stake here. We are in the year 2023, and we need to protect our libraries because without a library, a community cannot exist. A library is the backbone of a community. And I just want to... And I want to finish up by saying that right now, if you guys don't know any librarians or any booksellers or any teachers, here's what you need to know. They are at the front line of a culture war they did not ask for any part of. And why are they at the front line of this culture war? Because they believe that people should have the right and access to any type of book that they want, regardless. There are books that I find extraordinarily offensive and disgusting, but you know what? I fight like hell for people to have the right to read that book. So when you are thinking, when you hear on the news and how easy it is to scroll past, oh, this library is closing, or these people are trying to ban this book, whether it be genderqueer, whether it be George M. Johnson's book, whether it be any of those books, stop, listen, and think about what you can do in your community to speak up for people who need your voice. That is so important especially for the young kids that are coming up after us, man. And the last thing I'll say is this. I have been very fortunate to go around this country and speak to many kids in ages from elementary school all the way through high school. And I can tell you one thing. They are pissed. They are pissed off, and trust me, they are going to change the world and make it the way it should have been from the very beginning.
Thank you, TJ. That was very powerful.
I don't even know if that was the question you asked.
It works. It works. So just following up on this theme of kind of having that accountability to readers, certain communities, and feeling this kind of pressure from just people wanting to ban certain books and not wanting to represent certain communities in these stories, how or what kind of advice would you give to aspiring writers who are trying to get kind of their footing into this world, be storytellers, and really just want to be able to be included in that conversation, in those narratives, if they're feeling that kind of weight and that pushback? You were starting it off, TJ, so we can have you.
Yeah, so we just got out of Pride, right? Yeah, Pride is a riot. Okay, it's not a celebration. It's not a parade. It's not a picnic in the park with your family. It is a riot. The basis of Pride is a riot. I moved to Tucson, Arizona when I was 15 years old, and I lived there until I was 34. Do you know how Pride started in Tucson? In the 1970s, a queer man from Nebraska was murdered after he went to a gay bar in Tucson. He was murdered by four teenage boys. They got a slap on the wrist. No jail time, nothing. They were released after that, and it did not stay on their record. That's how Pride started in Tucson. That is how it coalesced, because our community was so upset with being treated so poorly that we had to go in and make our own space. And look, if you are a queer person or from another marginalized community and you are writing, because the American Library Association last year, when they came forward and talked about the top 10 most banned and challenged books in the United States, all 10 were queer. All 10. 2 of them were also from Black authors about the Black experience. So when you hear about people wanting to ban books and they're talking about saving the children, they're not. They don't give a shit about the children. It is about racism. It is about homophobia, pure and simple. That is what it boils down to. So when you have people like you, writers, trying to find their place in the world, write like you're going to piss someone off, because I guarantee you the more you piss people off, trust me, that's how you're going to be able to put your mark out there. Write like you're going to make someone angry. Write like you are angry. Write like you want to write a story that you've never gotten to see before, that you've never gotten to see a person like yourself in. Write for yourself, and don't let anybody tell you else what to do, because let me tell you, man, there's nothing like the act of creation, and at the same time, it's going to piss a lot of people off, because stories have power. Trust me, I know I have pissed a lot of people off.
On the other hand, I will go the opposite of Firebrand here, but on the other hand, we actually are currently experiencing a really golden age of publishing. For the first time since, access to publishing on a self-publishing platform means anyone can publish. I would say, like, my debut novel, The Lives of Tao, had an Asian main character, but back then, back in early 2010s, I wasn't sure if, like, the American public would embrace, like, a minority character, an Asian dude, basically, which is, like, the most, yes. So I almost said a few things I probably shouldn't have said. So I actually leaned away from using, leaned away from the Asian main character's culture, because I just wasn't sure. And, like, if you think about it, 10 years ago, how many, secondary world epic fantasies were, like, not based in, like, medieval Europe or Arthurian legend? So really, in the past 10 years, we've really experienced a real golden age of just people exploring different cultures, different races, genders, just everything's been so much more broader now. So for anybody who wants to write and who wants to get into this field, I would say you now have so much more freedom to write what really speaks to you, what sparks joy, or what makes you angry.
Well, yeah, but I also don't think that everybody has, in this country right now, we don't have that kind of freedom. You can write whatever you want, but at the same time, people are going to go into libraries and go into children's schools and go into bookstores and say, I don't want this
Absolutely,
accessible.
but I mean, so publishing though, okay? Now publishing is a business, but publishing right now, more than compared to the past 10 years, has been so much more open with, like, exploring new ideas and new themes. And when I say it's a golden age, I'm not saying that there's always going to be a backlash. Whenever you have, whenever everything expands, whenever the room gets bigger for everybody, there's going to be a backlash for people who want to keep that room small. And so there's definitely, we need to push back on that. But also from a publishing standpoint, as a writer who wants to write, about different cultures, about different races, this is a good time to really explore. Because back in the day, we wouldn't do that. The only Asian epic fantasy that I knew about growing up was the Rift War saga, which was written by Raymond E. Feist. And that's no longer the case.
Yeah, so Wesley and I actually got our publishing start like at the same time in the early, it was 2012, I think. And at that point, my first book had a gender fluid intersex protagonist. And publishing was a bit like, with the what now?
Yeah.
To the point where, like, my first cover copy basically straight washed Micah and made it seem like they were two different people instead of before and after gender transition. And because I was like 22 at the time, I was too kind of shy to push back at that. They didn't do it out of malice, but it still resulted in, I think, people either picking it up expecting a straight romance and being very confused, or just not knowing it was out there. So it went very under the radar. And I think maybe if it had debuted now, it might be a little bit different. And Dragonfall is kind of my return to gender fluid fantasy, because growing up, I loved 90s fantasy in particular, loved me some Pern. Robin Hobb is my my absolute favorite author. I dedicated this to her and I sent it to her. I was like, turn the page for a surprise, and then she emailed me and I was like, yes, this is amazing. And I would cling to like any, iota of like queer characters in fantasy. So I was very into The Fool by Robin Hobb. I read the Vaniel trilogy, Lynn Flewelling stuff, and I would read it over and over and over because I couldn't find it anywhere. So
Did you say Lynn Flewelling? Night Runners is so good.
Yes, I love it. I read them so many times, till they fell apart. I love Lynn Flewelling. I'm currently rereading Elizabeth Hayden, which isn't queer, but is great 90s fantasy as well. So I really wanted to just write that kind of feel, but with an updated twist. So this still has a non-binary lead, and it's set in a world where it's considered rude to assume a stranger's gender, so everyone defaults to they, them, and when you get to know each other better, you would like do a hand signal to just kind of really quickly show your pronouns, and also it's like a gesture of informality, like you've gone past that like we're no longer strangers bit. Because I would like that in real life, because I'm non-binary, but I present very feminine, so it's always like, oh, ladies, and you're like, not a lady. So I wrote what I really wanted to see. But yeah, there has been backlash. Some people are like, there was one review that was like, the main character is gender fluid, get over it. And we're still having to deal with that kind of stuff now. But I'm still really happy that I managed to get it, my work out there. And hopefully open the door for other people to come after, because I'm a book coach and a creative writing lecturer as well, and I'll have so many writers come to me and be like, well, I don't think there's a market for this, or I don't know if there will be, or is this too weird or too niche? And like, you can only try and see and hope, because yeah, I do think we have made great gains. Something like Gideon the Ninth, I think, would struggle to have been published 10 years ago. But you guys, by being the readers, by enthusiastically embracing these different types of stories, have helped move it forward. So publishing's like, oh, well, okay, there's money here. We'll get it out there, because at the end of the day, money talks, right?
That was the best answer, yeah. That's the reason. This is popular?
Yeah,
All right,
they've done
do
it
whatever you want.
because you guys bought the like weird queer books and stuff.
Yes.
It's you guys who have done it.
Buy
as much
all
as
the
us
weird queer books there
Yes.
are. Buy
Weird
all
queer
of them.
dragons right here.
Yeah.
That time skip in the Lynn Flowing books. So mad.
I know.
Right books? No?
Yeah.
But time skip. Yeah, I came into this industry probably almost 25 years ago. And so I have seen how far it's come, but it still has a long way to go. And to your point, I think like the best thing that I can do and that you can do is to read outside our comfort zone, to read, books by marginalized people, to support new writers and not just the writers you've heard of, and to take a chance on worlds that are unfamiliar. Because you're right, like what has made the difference is realizing that there's a huge demand and that people are absolutely hungry to see their own experience and to find books that speak to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess to aspiring writers, I would say what I wish someone had said to me, or someone, a time traveler had come back and said this to me when I was in high school. But what makes you weird now is what's going to make you successful later. It's what's going to allow you to tell your unique stories with your unique voice and your experience, to tap into that sort of that maladjustment and that pain and that like teenage agony. I know a lot of us we're at Comic-Con. This is Nerd Kingdom, okay? Yes. So we were all like not the cool kid in school. That is going to serve you well going forward in your lives. And I wish someone had let me know, but then the argument would be, well, then would you have been as weird? I don't know. And then the other thing I would say is Moms for Liberty is a hate group. And if you are a parent and an educator, my mom is a retired English teacher, and she's like, I would have been fired if I was still teaching, because that's where we're at now, is teachers get fired for teaching books. But yeah, if you are in a position where you feel comfortable going into a school board meeting and you can see these people kind of infecting your community, it would be very appreciated by both us and the kids around you if you would go in there and talk to them and speak back to the crap that they are putting out.
Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you all so much. I know we are short on our time. We only have a few minutes. So my final question, if you can answer it very quickly, we'll see, is when someone is reading your book, picks it up, what do you hope will resonate with them most? We'll start with Victoria.
Especially for my Realmbreaker books, the thing I want to do is make you feel like you belong in a fantasy world, that you can be part of the team, that you can exist in this place. And I know writing there is never ever going to be a book that is able to encompass every single identity and marginalization, but the point is to make you feel like there is space for you. So I never want to write a world or a story that specifically excludes or makes you feel like you couldn't drop yourself into it and also exist there. It might not be fun for you. We're talking about fantasy adventures, but I always want to make you feel like you could be part of this world. And I always want to, at the end of the day, I feel like I build roller coasters, and I want to put you in the seat and buckle you in and just send you on your way. And if the only thing I give you is an escape for a few hours, then I feel like I have very much done my job.
So it's an interesting question, because I'm not sure I've ever really thought about like it in those terms, because I always feel like one of the things as a writer is you make a thing, but you're not always sure what people are going to get out of that thing, and you're not always sure what the points of connection will be. You know, like I said, I really do. I like to make room for mistakes and bad decisions and all of the stuff that I feel like I really respond to. But I think, you know, when you were talking about it before, about like how like your weirdness is what you bring to the table, like in the specific is the universal. And so like the thing I'm trying to do is tell this extremely specific story about this person and I want it to feel true to you. And I want the world to feel really true to you. And I want to, like, when I'm building the world, the thing I come back to again and again is thinking about our world and like, what would people do with magic? What would they really do with magic? And like trying to find my way through that so that you, when you come out of it, can really see yourself there. Not just, you know, you in the larger sense, but you like, oh, here's where I would be. Here's what I would do. Here's how I would abuse the system.
Yeah, I think across my work, I'm always sort of writing people from the margins or people who are kind of locked out of society and making them the heroes of their own stories. And for this one in particular, I wanted to not only write a queer norm world, but a queer celebratory world. And I want it to my hope is that it feels like home to someone, like all those 90 Fantasies books did for me.
So I started working on the Art of Prophecy with the first book of the War Saga, like shortly after like watching 7 seasons of Game of Thrones. And then the pandemic happened, you know, and I had a baby, so it was a really dark time. So like, not because of the baby, I'm just saying circumstances.
You were just very sleep deprived.
But you know,
well,
so
sure.
it comes down to like, I want my readers to walk away with joy. You know, it's you know, I feel like, you know, fantasy, you know, just speculative fiction in general, just gotten kind of dark the past decade or so. So when I wrote The Art of Prophecy, I wanted the feeling that like, I want that magical feeling that I got when I used to watch Samurai Sunday movies. You know, I wanted joy, I wanted brotherhood, I wanted people to go on this adventure and have a good time. And when they put the book down, they're like, man, I really miss these guys. I want to hang out with them again. You know, so I really had to focus on like, you know, adventuring and fantasy can be light, it can be fun, it can be joyful, it can be exciting, without having to like, I mean, there are some dark moments, but you know, but the tone, I want people to come up with a tone that humanity can do great things, and we all have free choice. You know, I'm a big fan of free will and free choice, and you know, when you see these characters make their decisions within the series, you know, I want you to know that these people made it as an organic choice, that they did it because of who they are, not because of what, you know, we expect them to do.
I hope that if you walk away from my book learning something, is that queer people matter, queer stories are important, queer people should be the heroes, the villains, the sidekicks, the good guys, the bad guys, everywhere in between, trans rights forever, and fuck anybody who thinks otherwise. Thank you. Bye.
All right, well, you all are fabulous. That was like the fastest few minutes ever. So we are right at our time, and I just wanted to conclude by giving a huge thank you to TJ, Wesley, LR, Holly, and Victoria for your generosity, all your thoughts, being here today.